1988 and Czechoslovakia, formerly known as the Czechoslovak Social Republic, is getting a bit restless. Its leader was first secretary of the Communist Party Miloš Jakeš, who famously led the purges of the 1970s. Jakeš and the Communist Party were very much in control of Czechoslovakia at this point and weren't suffering from a great deal of dissent, as was the case in, say, Poland or East Germany. Quality of life there was slightly higher than the rest of Eastern Europe, and the markers of modern life like television were widely available, which, along with all other mass media, was tightly controlled by the government. This prevented notable dissidents such as Václav Havel from reaching an audience. This isn't to say that the people of Czechoslovakia didn't have any complaints. Many, especially the young, had a great deal. Throughout 1988 and 1989 there were demonstrations throughout the country, notably in Bratislava as well as in the capital, Prague. These were merely calls for reforms though, and weren't revolutionary in nature, and so the government did little about them. In fact, the communist government had seen what was going on throughout the Eastern Bloc, and so made some superficial concessions to make it look like they were willing to reform. On the 17th of November 1989, a student demonstration took place in Prague to commemorate the murder of a student by the Nazis 50 years earlier. Many of these students then started chanting anti-communist slogans, which led to the police dispersing the protesters. Rumours spread that a student had been killed by the police, and for many this was the final straw. Tens of thousands then took to the streets, strikes were called, and Havel, along with other noted anti-communists, made their way to the capital in what is known as the Velvet Revolution. Strikes spread, protests grew, and Jakeš, along with the entire communist government, resigned on the 24th of November. He was replaced by Karel Urbanek, who was a much more moderate communist, but by this point many people were simply sick and tired of the broader regime, and Urbanek lasted for a whole 5 days. He did, however, end the Communist Party's monopoly on power before resigning. After several weeks of negotiations, a compromise government was established which, for the first time since 1948, was majority non-communist. Havel was made president of Czechoslovakia by this government on the 28th of December, and soon after this he gave a blanket pardon to all of Czechoslovakia's political prisoners. Minor reforms were undertaken, but the process of formally ending communism and transitioning to a capitalist model needed to wait for this new government to gain legitimacy. This was done via elections in June of 1990, which saw Havel retain the presidency. Central parliamentary elections saw Havel's party, the Civic Forum, win, which then ruled alongside its Slovak equivalent, the Public Against Violence Party. The separation of the anti-communist bloc into Czech and Slovak parts is indicative of a brand new problem that Czechoslovakia now faced: the resurgence of nationalism, which communism had previously suppressed. This doesn't mean that this nationalism couldn't be dealt with. The majority of Czech and Slovak citizens, along with their politicians, were in favour of maintaining the Czechoslovakian Union. A new election in June 1992 saw two new frontrunners: the Civic Democratic Party led by Václav Klaus and the Movement for a Democratic Slovakia led by Vladimir Mečiar. In mid-1992, Klaus and Mečiar sat down to discuss what the new Czechoslovakia would look like, and they couldn't agree on anything. Mečiar wanted the Slovak half of the country to have its own currency and more autonomy than the Czechs wanted to give it. You should be aware that Mečiar's demands were largely his own, and that Slovak politicians would have been quite happy to simply approve of a union of equals. Instead, he made it clear that the Czechs didn't really care, and so it was better for them to both go their own ways. The Slovak National Assembly voted in mid-July to create a new constitution and a fancy new flag for their new country, the Slovak Republic. It was agreed that Czechoslovakia would divide on January 1st, 1993. The Slovak Republic and the Czech Republic thus went their own ways in what is called the Velvet Divorce. Few people in either country were really that upset about the breakup, barring Havel, but no one listened to him anymore. But also, few were happy about it. The breakup of Czechoslovakia is interesting, not simply because it gave the world two new nations, but because it's one of the only national disillusions which came about on a tide of apathy. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for watching, and a special thanks to all of these patrons you see on screen.
History of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was formed in October of 1918. The country ended up splitting into two in January 1st of 1993, which is known as Czech Republic and Slovakia, but Slovakia declared itself as a sovereign state in July of 1992. Czechoslovakia formed because of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Why did they split? Politicians could not decide on what they wanted Czechoslovakia to look like. Czechoslovakia's separation was peaceful and was resulted in a nationalist sentiment, and they also split their common goods such as their military equipment, and their split helped with the population control, and in 1938 it was also occupied by Nazi Germany until 1945. Where did the immigrants settle? Most of the Czech immigrants settled to Cleveland, but by the 20th century, some Czech communities settled in Texas and the Blackland Prairies, where the areas had better farming and better hope. They went as far as to settling to Washington, Burleson, and Brazos countries as well. So moving on to their belief structures, first, Christianity was the most prominent religion in Czechoslovakia during the 20th century until the country was split into two. So today, many Czech citizens are actually religiously unaffiliated or atheists. And now today, many Slovakians are mainly Christians or Roman Catholic. So ever since the country was split into two, Slovakia and the Czech Republic have had very different religious views. The Czech Republic was actually described as one of the least religious countries in the entire world, with about 72% of their citizens being religiously unaffiliated. Meanwhile, around 63% of Slovakia is Catholic. And during the 20th century, the Roman Catholic Church actually dominated the whole country of Czechoslovakia. So now moving on to their education systems, there were actually many Czechoslovakian schools located in Vienna, Austria during the late 20th century, and nearly 90% of children ages 3 to 6 attended nursery schools because they were easy to access and they were free. And they have a very different education system from here in the US. Their middle school was called primary school, and the next 4 years, which was high school, is lower secondary school. And they were also known for their really, really good education system. Now moving on to their universities, students can study for free at public universities as long as the universities are public and that they enroll in classes that are in the country's native language. They have a really great reputation for amazing universities, and a really popular school today in the Czech Republic is the Czech University of Life Sciences, located in Prague. And Czechoslovakia was also ranked one of the top 10 safest countries in the entire world, making international students feel a lot safer and even local students feeling a lot safer. On December 5th through the night, the angel, St. Nicholas, and the devil would make their rounds to houses around the neighborhood. When the children wake up, they go to look at their shoes in the windowsill, and if they are filled with sweet treats and toys, the angel left these, which meant they were good. If their shoes were filled with coal, that means the devil left them and they were bad. In Slovakia, they eat carp on Christmas because they think it brings them good luck. The carp are stored in bathtubs at least 2 days prior to Christmas. Since they are bottom feeders, this just tends to keep them more fresh. Neighbors that take these carp in sacrifice hygiene because they are taking space in their bathtub. On May 1st, men go out into the woods and find tall trees to use as maypoles. They cut all but 3 feet off of the top of the tree. They then decorate these poles to symbolize love, new life, and good growth. They are normally decorated in rainbow ribbon, and they leave these up until June 1st in neighbors' yards. Burning of the witches happens on April 30th, and this is when a huge bonfire is built. They light it at dusk and place an effigy of a witch in the fire. This is believed to get rid of the witch's powers and weaken them to where it'll bring warmer weather and get rid of cold weather.
Immigration to the US, there were 2 different times where there were a lot of people who came over at once that were Czechoslovakian. Once was in 1848 and the second was in 1945, 1946. If you came over, you were coming through Castle Garden, possibly Ellis Island, depending on the time period. When Czechoslovakians immigrated to the US, while they all did not have the same living facility and or lifestyle, oftentimes it was similar. Most times it was the men who would go find jobs, while the women and children stayed behind doing the tasks and chores around the house. The Velvet Divorce is a notable part of the Czechoslovakian history. It occurred in 1993. It became the essential split between Czech and Slovakia. There was an event that occurred, though, leading up to this, known as the Velvet Revolution. It was a peaceful protest that occurred in 1989. It only lasted a short couple of months. U.S. relations with the Czech Republic. They have diplomatic ties with each other and are part of a lot of the same organizations, including the UN, NATO, and many more. As well, they have embassies located for each other in either country.
Like many Eastern European immigrants, Czechoslovakians were mainly Catholic. However, in the United States, particularly in Cleveland, Ohio, where many Czechoslovakians settled, the majority of Americans were Protestant. The differences in their traditions, beliefs, and interpretations of the Bible caused many Protestant Americans to see Catholics as immoral and corrupt. After the split between the Czech Republic and Slovakia, Slovakia became a communist country. With heightened tensions after World War II, particularly towards the former USSR, many Americans not only had a hatred for communists, but viewed them as lazy and with no work ethic. This greatly affected Slovakian Americans and their ability to find jobs within the United States. Even today, many Americans still hold the belief that Eastern European countries and their people are prone to alcoholism. This stereotype is similar to the one held today against Russians. This, combined with the Red Scare and hatred for communists in the 1900s, fueled the idea that Slovakian immigrants could not hold down a job due to perceived higher alcohol consumption. As mentioned previously, witch burning is a Slovakian tradition done at the end of April. However, because this tradition is so different from mainstream American holidays, many outsiders viewed it as satanic and witchcraft. Progressives created settlement houses to remove Slovakian culture from communities so they would not corrupt other Anglo-Saxon Americans.